by these fairly rigid pyramid schemes where power and resources always flowed up and abuse and environmental degradation always flowed down. The pyramid scheme was justified by saying that we need order, we need armies of people who will obey, we need to defend our borders. If we don't constantly expand our technology and expand our military capabilities and expand our kingdom's power, then some other kingdom will come along and knock us off. So they brought that type of mindset to the Americas, and with it they brought slavery, which you know, maybe, well, I'll just leave it at that. And they brought this idea of conquest and this idea of dominion, also known in this country sometimes as manifest destiny, this idea that the earth belongs to us and it's our right and our duty to take whatever we want from it. Not only the land, but also the people living on the land. And so here we see some drawings that represent the colonization of the Americas. The birds who are wearing hats, those are starlings. They're a highly aggressive invasive species from Europe. They're kicking out these native cerulean warblers. The one in the middle is stealing the young of this pileated woodpecker to take it off to a settlement school to be re-educated. This one here is bringing a blanket infected with smallpox, committing acts of genocide. And they brought, they also brought a lot of deceit. Europeans saw native people as being less than human, and so they didn't have to treat them as they would treat each other. So here we see this bulldog tearing up this treaty. Because I want to ask you all, anyone want to venture a guess at how many treaties that the U.S. government upheld? Treaties with native people?
None of them?
0. A big fat 0. And this continent was incredibly abundant. And Europeans took as much as they could, right? This sort of colonial paradigm is based on this idea of first conquest, then taking, both slave taking and resource taking, and then making stuff out of all that you've taken. And so that it was the colonization of the Americas that set Europe up for the Industrial Revolution. So here we see textile manufacturing and railroads and all these big new buildings and institutions coming along. All of this industry was rapidly advancing technology. It was also further strengthening the pyramid scheme as these hierarchies became more and more set in stone. And I'm just going to sort of roll on through to say that we're still living in a colonial paradigm today. Because after the conquest, after the taking, after the making, after the development and industrial expansion and building of all this stuff and all this technology, that creates a society that's even more powerful than it was before. It creates the ability to do even more conquest, even more taking, even more making, etc., etc. And the colonial paradigm assumes that land will be stripped, that the people at the bottom of the pyramid scheme, the slaves, will be exhausted, worked to death in some cases, or something like that. I want to just mention, just to be clear, that just like colonization is not a thing of the past, it's still with us today, so is slavery. Actually, there are more slaves in the world today than there were before the U.S. Civil War. We just call them by different names. They're called prisoners and things like that. And so nowadays, so the pyramid scheme, the colonial paradigm must be expansive. It must constantly conquer more and more lands as it exhausts its resource base. And as the pyramid scheme expands, now that it's become this sort of global phenomenon, it doesn't look like this anymore. It looks more like this, where those at the top are unbelievably wealthy. We call them the 1% nowadays. and more people are being forced into the lowest levels of this sort of destitute living. In the true cost of coal, we have this sequence of that helps us to understand the system that keeps this pyramid scheme in place. And more specifically, this system that keeps us playing into the pyramid scheme. Even though I'm sure the vast majority of us don't intend to reinforce it, sometimes we can't help it. Because we're already in the middle of it. And it looks like this. So on the first part is this big power plant monster that's gobbling up fossil fuels, and it's also gobbling up other resources like lumber and land and water, feeding it all into this big hungry furnace of a mouth. All of this stuff, it's towing behind it this train of factories, and all of this stuff is being converted into all of these products that are sold to us, and actually nowadays are being shipped across the world and back again before they're sold to us, consuming even more resources in the process. But, you know, and nowadays people have all sorts of nifty technology all around the world, but so much of this stuff, still today, the vast majority of it is here in the US and Canada and in Europe, and it's making its way to this scene that we call the Temple of Conspicuous Consumption. This is its own kind of pyramid. You can see on the lower level, there are these country club McMansions. Up above that, there are shiny new SUVs, and at the top, there's a big, brightly lit mall that says "Consume" in huge letters. Mm-hmm. So we're being sold all this stuff, some of which we don't even need, and before we know it, all of this stuff is going down the poop chute into the dump because it's built to break. There's this concept of planned obsolescence that ensures that this system keeps on going, and that we have to keep on buying, and that these companies keep on making profits, because so many things that could be made to last for generations are instead built out of some cheap plastic crap, and they break the second time you use them. So many things nowadays are designed to be thrown away after being used once, or even not used at all. And so we're talking about this one-way system where we're gobbling up all these resources, chopping them into a million pieces and turning them into a million products. They're being sold to us at an enormous profit because the true cost of these products is never reflected in the price that we pay for them. The true cost of these products is being borne by people and others, plants and animals, and watersheds that are in sacrifice zones, like mining areas, factory zones, sweatshops, things of this nature. And we're ending up with ever-growing mountains of toxic trash. The industries that are profiting off of this are pushing all of this stuff on us. I mean, we are bombarded with advertisements and all this sort of psychological warfare convincing us to buy all this stuff. It's because they're making money off of it. They're at the top of the pyramid. They're the ones who benefit from this stuff. And they're pushing these things on us like drug pushers do. You know, I just heard on the radio just the other day, as an example, that the FCC has just submitted a proposal to change the laws around how the internet works. They're getting rid of this thing called net neutrality, which is the idea that everyone should have the same access to the internet. If they get rid of that, it'll make it possible for companies to charge really high prices for a fast lane version of the internet, and the rest of us who can't afford that, it's going to be back to the days of dial-up. They're extorting us, right? You know, they get us hooked on something, they get us to the point where we need it and we're dependent on it, and then they jack up the prices. And that's how they justify this sort of extreme bottom-of-the-barrel resource extraction. They say, you need natural gas, right? You need oil, you need gas, you need all this stuff.